Today I'm with the first pick. We're talking post-Cam Ward Pro Day, and we're going to spin it forward in terms of other draft prospects, things that go on during this part of the draft cycle. If you're an NFL team, what you're looking for, what you're trying to get accomplished in the last 30 days. And I'm joined by my guy, Ran Carthon, former Titans GM, former Florida running back.
Yes, sir.
I didn't say almost Georgia this time. He wanted to go to the U, but they didn't want him there.
I did not. It's not true. That's not true.
Fun fact about Rand, we were at the Cam Ward Miami Pro Day yesterday, and I noticed it, but it didn't register until he mentioned it afterwards. He had his lanyard on with his credential, and it was a Miami lanyard. He refused to put that around his neck because he is a Gator through and through, only in his pocket, and that will never grace your neck. Is that the plan?
Yeah, and as you saw this morning, I actually left it behind. I didn't mean to do that, but I left it behind. But I'm sure my kids will find it as a good souvenir.
I'll say this. So Rand's going to be – I'm so excited about having Rand on more of these podcasts with the first pick because, number one, he's a great dude. Number two, he has so much insight as a former general manager, as a former scout, as a former player, as a former college player. And this is how excited people are to have less of me and more of you. Yesterday's podcast we did – from Coral Gables at the Pro Day, in addition to the interview that you did with Cam Ward. People are incredibly excited about it. And if you know anything about the internet, people generally aren't excited about it a lot. So this is great news for me personally.
We'll say for now.
For now. Hey, man, that's all right. The marriage is off to a great start. The first thing isn't things going sideways. So I'm pumped about this. So we talked about Cam Ward yesterday, and you interviewed him, and people can check that out either in the podcast feed or on YouTube, NFL and CBS. But let's talk about the other quarterback who is going to be a first-round pick and whose pro day is April 4th, Shedeur Sanders. And let's talk a little bit about him because we know who Cam is. His pro day was spectacular. If you're Shedeur and you're almost certainly going to be a first-round pick, probably a top 5 pick, there are teams at the top that need a quarterback. The Titans, the Browns, the Giants are all picking 1, 2, and 3. What does Shedeur bring to the table that's a little different than Cam? And I'll give you what I see when I watch him play. He's not as athletic as Cam. That doesn't mean he can't. He's athletic enough. I think he surprised me with his athleticism in the last 2 years at Colorado. He felt like more of a pocket passer early in his career. His arm isn't as good as Cam's. That's not necessarily the end of the world. Cam's arm is way better than I thought it was, by the way, in person.
Yeah.
And he's not making the off-platform plays as consistently as Cam, I'll say. He did a lot of off-platform stuff at Colorado, the offensive line. Struggled in 2023, got a little better in 2024, but that was one of his abilities to sort of manufacture plays when the play broke down. I think he's a fantastic deep ball thrower. But if you're weighing one against the other and you're sitting in the draft room, I suppose the question is, what does Shedeur bring that's great in terms of what you're looking for in a new team, and how do you build an offense around that player, because he's not going to come in there and be Josh Allen because that's not his game.
So it's funny how we've evolved, evaluating the quarterback position. There was a time where you preferred your quarterback to stay in the pocket.
Yeah.
And now we have more of the dual threat, guys, the Lamars, the Josh Allens, even Mahomes to a degree is his version of a dual threat guy. So a guy like Shedeur, who's seen primarily as a pocket passer, now gets dinged a little bit from being able to stand in the pocket and process. Some have always heard Kyle Shanahan say, being able to run, being able to have that threat is great, and it keeps defenses on their heels. However, at some point you have to be able to stand in the pocket, play quarterback, process, and get the ball out. And that's what Shedeur does. Yeah. He completes the ball at a high percentage.
Yes,
and he knows where he wants to go with the ball. And the coolest thing about watching him play is he takes the completion. He takes the completion. He takes the easy thing to keep the drive going and keep the drive moving.
Can I ask you one thing quickly?
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting you say that, and I think you're exactly right. It felt like at times Cam was looking to hit too many triples and home runs as opposed to taking the singles, and Cam was so successful that you understood it. And Caleb had the same thing coming out of USC, but it feels like Shedeur's willing to take the check down and live to fight another play as opposed to forcing the ball in double coverage and maybe getting an interception instead of a 30-yard gain.
Yeah, and I think Cam would say that.
Okay.
I think Cam will tell you, hey, look, I got a guy right here in the flat. I should have taken that, but I was looking for that extra shot, that deep ball, the explosive. And whereas Shedeur's like, I want to extend the drive. I'll take it. And I think he completed 73% of his passes last year.
Pretty good.
And then another cool thing about him is the variance of offenses he's played in.
Yeah.
The multiple coordinators he had at Jackson State and the multiple coordinators he's had, at Colorado, and then to end with a guy who has NFL, background in Shermer, having played in the NFL style system. So I think that's what's going to allow him to grow. And, at his pro day in the coming days, April 4th, I think it is.
Yep.
His last name is Sanders. And, he does have the DNA of prime time. So I think when the lights come on and his time to shine, I think he'll be ready for it.
Yeah, I think with the first pick RV is going to be rolling up to Boulder on April 4th too. So I got to gas that thing up and get it out of the shop. Before I ask you about Shedeur's teammate, I want to ask you, and you talked about something that jogged my memory about Kyle Shanahan saying at some point you got to be able to play on time, play from the pocket. Trey Lance traded up to number 3, the 49ers did, to get Trey Lance, and then they ended up taking Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant. Brock Purdy could play from the pocket. Now, Trey unfortunately got hurt, and we didn't get to see an extensive version of what Trey might look like in that offense. But sometimes you get the quarterback you need, not the one you want. And Brock Purdy doesn't have the biggest arm in the world. He does what you need him to do, and he does it on time, and he does it from the pocket. And I think if he had come out a year before at Iowa State, he might have gotten drafted a little higher. I felt like he was pressing at times his final year there. But that's just an example of a guy that actually checks the boxes, but you didn't know that was supposed to be your partner long term because you got caught up, with your eyeball and the pretty girl walking through the school.
Yeah, it's what we talked about yesterday. The using the term the big ugly, the one that didn't necessarily fit the eye test and the height, weight, speed measurables, but like we talked about, a good football player. And I was there at the time of both of those picks, and even the year that Brock got in. You start the year with Trey Lance as your starting quarterback. And then Trey gets hurt, and Jimmy Garoppolo's rehabbing an injury. Then Jimmy comes in, and then Jimmy gets hurt. But just to show you the level of confidence that Kyle had in Brock at the time, I think it was the Miami game where Jimmy got hurt and Brock came in. That was his first NFL game. Brock threw the ball, I think, 38 times that game, and we won. Yeah. But that showed you Kyle's confidence in him and his ability to sit there in the pocket and be able to distribute the ball. And sometimes I say this all the time, like when it comes to playing quarterback, you don't always have to be number 1. You could be one of 11 and just play point guard and get the ball into the hands of the people that can score. And going back to Shedeur, he had a plethora of weapons around him. So a lot of times he just had to distribute the ball and get it to those guys' hands and let them go, make plays. And
it's funny you say that because one of the knocks on Brock, and we're starting to hear a little bit with Shedeur, is that, but he had McCaffrey, he had Ayuk, he had Debo, he had George Kittle. And my response is, well, is he not supposed to take advantage of those opportunities? So he's just doing what he's asked to do, and he's doing it at a high level. Did you know early on, maybe in practice, or was it one of those things that evolved as you saw him play more? Did it seem like Brock had it, or it was just one of those things that he sort of grew on you the more he played? No, for us, it was, you were happy to get him, where we got him. And then once he got in the building, you saw, like, I sat in the back of the plane, which is where they typically put most of the rookies. So I saw Brock prepare every week as if he was going to play. He had his iPad out, he had his call sheet, and he was going through the script, as we're traveling the game. So he was more than ready. And I'll never forget Fred Warner saying one time, because Brock was taking all the scout team reps, he was like, if this guy ever gets in a game, he's going to be a problem. And I think when guys like Fred, who's seen, all the quarterbacks play, and I'll never forget Aaron Rodgers going to Fred Warner, telling him after a game one year, like, hey, you're the best linebacker in the league. Wow. And so when you hear a guy like Fred Warner say that, you have to listen. Absolutely. It's a fun story, and that's what makes the draft so much fun, because sometimes we get caught up on the top 32 guys, and sometimes it's the guys that get drafted 250 to 265 or whatever that end up being impact players. A guy that's going to go top 5, in addition to probably Shedeur, is his teammate Travis Hunter. And this is the question we've been talking about since last summer. Cornerback, wide receiver, both, one or the other. Where are you coming down on where Travis Hunter makes the most sense at the next level in terms of just rookie getting his feet wet and then trying to build from there? Personally, I think it starts on defense. Okay. I think you put him in. I think he's plug and play day one. He's your starting corner. And
his unique trait, his blue trait, his superpower is ball skills and being able to attack the ball. And, me personally, if I were calling it on him, it's defense first, it's punt return, to allow him to have the ball in his hand and make some plays, and then allow him to earn packages on offense. Now, this is the National Football League. This is the top of the top. This is the best of the best. It's hard enough to master one position, in this league, let alone have to master two positions that require a lot of time to go into the nuances and the techniques. Like Travis's athleticism alone will allow him to do whatever he wants to do on the field. However, you're going against grown men who have wives, children, and mortgages. And so they win. I'll never forget Tavon Austin. He was a rookie. We drafted him in St. Louis. And all he kept saying was he couldn't wait to go against Jack Rabbit, Janoris Jenkins in one-on-ones. And I was like, hey, man, slow down. Be careful what you wish for. Oh, man, trust me, I can run a rep. Tavon runs a dig, and Rabbit's right in his hip, does a little slingshot, pulls himself forward. He comes back to me. Tavon's like, oh, he's good. And I was like, you were just trying to win with AA at this point. He knows tricks of the trade. He understands angles, positions, your split and your route, things that you can and can't do. These are all things that Travis is going to have to learn no matter what position he plays. So that's why I think it's defense first, punt return, and then let him earn packages on offense. There are teams that see him strictly as a receiver, and there are that, that see it vice versa. Start him at receiver, maybe have him play a little bit of nickel, here and there. And so he's the biggest enigma I think this league has ever seen. We talk about it. You have Chris Gamble from Ohio State, played both ways, played a ton of snaps a game, but he came into the league, was primarily a DB. People forget Champ Bailey played both ways. I know Charles Woodson gets, put in that category. Charles was a package guy on offense at Michigan, but Champ was a starting receiver, played over 100 snaps a game, but he was a Hall of Fame DB. And so I think Travis is the biggest enigma that we've seen in a very, very long time.
I'm trying to think. Chris was pretty slender, but I think he was a little bigger than Travis coming out.
Yeah, I think he was a little bigger. I think he was probably in that, not upper, but the low to mid 190, range. And
Champ was thick.
Yeah, Champ was a 200+ pound guy.
And I mentioned that because one of the questions I have about Travis as a wide receiver, again, he's the best athlete on the field, and he can do things that very few humans can do or have ever done. But what's he going to do when Patrick Surtain gets his hands on him, and how's he going to win at the line of scrimmage versus press in that situation? Is that something you would be concerned about when you're making these decisions? Because you don't want to put 15 pounds on Travis, I don't think.
Well, I mean, I think that goes for any receiver, any young receiver. It's a lot of these guys in college now, it's a lot of free releases. Right. They don't see much press coverage. And so they got to learn that part of the game anyway. So I think that's a part of the natural evolution of becoming an NFL wide receiver. But like you said, from a body structure standpoint, I would imagine Travis is going to be somewhere in the 180 to 185 range. Right. And his body can he probably put on and get to 190? Probably, but we don't know how he feels at these weights. And I think a lot of times is, having been on this personnel side, is we project what we want, onto the guys, and not necessarily understanding where these players may or may not feel comfortable. A lot of these players' shortcomings, they're shortcomings to us, but these guys have played with these said shortcomings to get to this point. So they understand, we talk about guys with shorter arms, like they've learned how to play with their lack of length and know what they can and can't do and what they can't. I mean, look at Aaron Donald, he was undersized, but became the most dominant player possibly that we've seen since Lawrence Taylor. Yeah. And you're talking about a 280-pound guy who I would go out on the limb and say the last few years of his career, he was well under 280. But nobody ever moved him off the ball, in the run game. And so, guys understand how to play with their limitations.
It's funny you say that because we talked to Braden Fisk last year at the Combine, and that was before he went and exploded at the Combine with his workout. And not a lot of people have been talking about him at that point. He had transferred from Western Michigan, I believe. He was at Florida State. And he said, I've had short arms my whole life. I know how to use my short arms, and I will prove that. And it's one of those things where I think we overthink it to the point that if we did a redraft today, Braden Fisk is a first-round pick, but he went in the second round because you've talked about this. You have your measurables. These are the what we're willing to work within. And if you go outside that, this dude better be special. And you got to have those conversations and understand that based on historical evidence. But sometimes a guy's just a good football player. Let me ask you this. So if we're sitting there at 4 and we're the Patriots and we draft Travis Hunter because he's there and he's special, I love the idea of putting him with Christian Gonzalez, but they signed – who they signed from Detroit? They signed the cornerback from Detroit. Carlton Davis. And Drake May desperately needs a wide receiver. So let's say we get him there. I'm more inclined to try to push him out there on the offensive side of the ball first to help out Drake May. But is that something where patience is better suited for Travis's long-term process?
Well, but it goes back to how, the Patriots could be one of those teams that say, hey, we view him as a receiver day one, and he could be our nickel, and sub.
That's
so now imagine that secondary,
Yeah.
Carlton Davis, Christian Gonzalez, and Travis Hunter as your nickel.
You can work with that.
And with Mike Vrabel's, his defensive mind, him and Terrell Williams and how they see things, like they'll find creative ways to put him in position to make plays on defense. And it's almost like it's now that I'm saying it, it's funny because it's almost the Patriot way, because the Patriot way under Belichick and Scott Pioli, who built the system, was built on versatility.
Yeah.
And the more you can do. I mean, Mike was the goal line tight end for those guys. Troy Brown and Deion Branch both played, both ways. So they have a bunch of guys throughout the history of the Patriots organization that can play multiple things.
As a Steelers fan, during those early 2000s when the Patriots were becoming the Patriots and Troy Brown would be out there playing the secondary, I said, man, that's so disrespectful. He's not even a cornerback and he's out there dominating. Julian Edelman is another example who was a quarterback at Kent State, and then he did all sorts of things once he got to New England.
I mean, think about how they used, fellow Gator Aaron Hernandez. He went from a F tight end and they had sets where they put him in the backfield.
Yep.
And he was in the backfield. And so, that's kind of the Patriot way. I'm having no understanding that grade system. It was one of the first grade systems I was taught when I got into scouting. It was all designed to help you build your 48-man game day roster, which on the back end was built on versatility. Like if you were the 4th, 5th corner or receiver, you have to be able to play. If you're the receiver, you got to be able to play inside and outside, or you got to be able to play special teams.
Right.
And so the more that you could do allowed you to be up on game day. So it was a system that was built around versatility.
That's interesting. When you say it out loud, it makes sense, but it's not something you hear a lot of people saying out loud.
Yeah.
Before we take a break, let me ask you this. Now that you bring it up, does that still work today? Because obviously the last few years, once Tom Brady left, the Patriots weren't the Patriots, or is that just a function of you don't have a franchise quarterback, everything else gets a lot more difficult?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's the name of our game. Yeah. You got to have a signal caller. You got to have that guy that controls it. And organizations, programs are built through the person getting the ball every single snap. And so let's not get it twisted. The Patriot way was it was a perfect storm.
Yeah, it was.
Right. You got one of the smartest coaches, if not the smartest coach to ever coach this game, and Bill Belichick. And then you just so happen in the 6th round at pick 199 get possibly the greatest quarterback to ever play.
Yeah.
And you mix those two together and you have a dynasty.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
So there's, to me, the chicken or the egg, type of argument. But Tom went on and won another one somewhere else now with a wildly talented team. But at the Patriot way, I don't think you get one without the other. Yeah.
No, I think that's exactly right. All right. Well, that was incredibly insightful. So again, you keep at this pace, you're going to be doing the podcast by yourself because you don't need me. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk a little more draft stuff as we sit here 30 days away from the actual draft. We'll be back right after this.
Guys, can you feel it? Legends were born here. History was made here. These are hallowed grounds.
Hallowed grounds? The NCIS squad room?
Well, I wasn't talking about that, but I was talking about Augusta National.
All right. It's finally time for the Masters. I hear it's a tradition unlike any other.
All right, welcome back with the first pick here, 30 days away. Ran Carthon. So let's talk about this, Ran. A month ago, if you're in the league in the front office, if you're scouts and you've been to 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 pro days, what's happening over the next month of the season as the pro day circuit's sort of winding down? I think the Colorado one on April 4th is sort of late. most of them are over by late March, excuse me. So everyone comes back to the facility and we're starting to have meetings, and is the board set? What do the final conversations look like?
For the most part, the final board should be close to being set.
Okay.
Now, depending on how you run your program, I always say it, everybody GM's different. You're going to have a round of meetings with your scouts and your coaches now, and to hear the coach's perspective, on the players and how they see them ranked. And then you'll have your final board. Like you said, the April 4th pro day is relatively late.
Yeah.
And so you'll have that now. The pro day, April 4th pro day, it would have to be disastrous for it to really affect your board that much.
Right.
But now you'll have, like I said, you'll have meetings. You'll still have some 30 visits sprinkled in, some final guys, maybe some back end, late round guys that you want to get in and get around the coaches and get to know a little bit more. But the meetings now coming will be critical. And then the biggest meeting you're going to have at this point, later in the process is the medical meeting, to get those final combine medical. Between now and then, you're going to have medical rechecks for guys that went to the combine and something was found.
Right.
And so they'll bring those guys back in. So that's probably the most critical meeting you're going to have, in the coming 30 days is that medical meeting.
So the coaches obviously come to these players late because they're playing until January, or if you're the Chiefs or the Eagles, you're playing until February. And these conversations now, what happens if a position coach and a coordinator love a player more than the scouting side? Like, how do we resolve one group wanting a player more than the other?
I think it comes down to really the decision makers.
Yeah.
The collaboration of the decision makers. So if we had a situation like that where, and the coaches we're talking about is typically the position coach and a coordinator and a scout. Now, what we did and what we did at the Titans and what we also did at the 49ers was it got to a point in the process where you paired up an area scout with a position coach. And so they had time to sit together and watch guys together, talk through guys together. So even if there was a difference, it wasn't a big variance in the difference. And if there was, then it'll come down to the GM, the head coach, and being able to, as long as they're on the same page and how they see the player, then you can make a decision. And sometimes it's just like any other marriage, it's give and take.
Yep.
And if they're really standing on the table for a guy, now you're not going to take a guy in the first round, because they're pounding the table for a guy you had as a 5th round prospect.
Right.
But there comes a point where you're like, okay, let's acquiesce on this one. Let's give them this one and see how it works. And if it works, great, then you can have that to build off of. And if it don't, then you're like, okay, now we understand why it didn't work and why we can't make that mistake again.
So Rick and I used to talk about this all the time in terms of the draft day, because it feels like it's sensationalized when it's viewed through the eyes of the media, and we have the cameras in the draft rooms on draft night, especially on the Thursday night, the first round. As Rick explained it in Minnesota, the draft board was set. There was no last minute decisions. If so-and-so happened, then we got to rush and do this. You have your board stacked, and as the guys come off the board, what's going to happen next. You sort of play through these scenarios in your mind. Is that accurate in terms of the way you guys approached it?
Oh, yeah. Board by draft time, board is done. What I'd like to do is maybe the day before the draft, bring the owner in, share the board.
Yeah.
Hey, this is how we see it. And prior to that, you work in, you get your guys together. I like to call it the situation room.
Yeah.
Like they have at the White House. You get, you strip titles away. You get your top bona fide evaluators, and you go in the hole and you just watch with guys in pods, right? So you get a bunch of different scenarios, and you do this leading up into, that final week of the draft. So you'll have different scenarios to work off of in case this happens, if this team trades up.
Right.
And that's a big part of the pro scouting department coming in, understanding team needs, what people want, what they need, things that you're hearing. Because at some point you have to turn everything off because it becomes misinformation season.
100%.
But yeah, the draft board is set. You know where you want to go. And then draft day, that first day is hurry up and wait.
Right.
Because the draft doesn't come on to 6 or 7, depending on where you're from. And you may not pick, depending on where you're picking, you may not pick until 8:30 or 9 o'clock. And so it's a hurry up and wait process.
A few things more frustrating for fans, especially fans of the Rams in recent years when they would just trade out of the first round. So they're waiting all day, and then they don't have a first round pick, so they got to wait. The Rams figured it out. I think they did all right for themselves. But on draft night, I know they would get frustrated with that. All right, that's all we got for today, man. So we're good. Back-to-back days. You're still here, so I appreciate that.
Hey, man, Steph Curry and Draymond.
Yeah, he says that. Let's be real. We know who Steph Curry is.
No, you're Steph. I'm Draymond.
I appreciate it.
You're the point guard.
I appreciate the positive reinforcement because that had been lacking in my professional life. So this is that's a step in the right direction. Producer Stryker, great job today. Thanks to my guy Ran. And 30 days to the draft, and we'll be back tomorrow. Talking offensive line with Kyle Long. Can't wait for that. And then later in the week, we're talking quarterbacks with Danny Cannell. And then Ran and I'll be back next week. So we'll see you guys then. Thanks for watching.